"You're only here because leaving you out would make me look compassionate." The words landed with the cold precision of a boardroom verdict, quieter than a shout, but heavy enough to silence every hopeful thought Naomi Brooks had carried into that afternoon. For one brief moment, she considered asking the driver to stop the car and take her back to the Blue Lantern Diner, where the smell of fresh coffee and warm biscuits felt far more honest than the marble mansion rising beyond the iron gates ahead. 5 days later, that same billionaire stood outside her tiny apartment, holding nothing except regret, waiting for a conversation she no longer owed him. The strange part was never that Alistair Mercer, the legendary founder of Mercer Global, had remembered a black waitress in his will. The strange part was that nobody, not even Naomi herself, understood she had been protecting the most valuable part of his legacy for years without realizing it. My name is Naomi Brooks, and for as long as I could remember, I had been invisible to people with money. At 27, I worked double shifts at a neighborhood diner just outside downtown Chicago. My uniform was always spotless, my shoes carefully polished, and my smile never depended on the size of the tip. I believed people deserved kindness before they earned it. Most customers forgot my name before they reached the parking lot. One customer never did. Every Thursday morning at exactly 8 o'clock, an older gentleman with silver hair and thoughtful blue eyes sat alone in booth 7. He ordered oatmeal, black coffee, and fresh fruit, never anything more. He thanked every server, folded his own napkin, and always asked how everyone else was doing before speaking about himself. To me, he was simply Mr. Alistair, a quiet widower who enjoyed newspapers, crossword puzzles, and conversations that lasted longer than breakfast. I never asked why a man wearing watches worth more than my yearly salary preferred eating in a modest diner instead of private clubs filled with executives. He never volunteered the answer. Over 3 years, I helped him carry groceries when arthritis made his hands shake. I delivered meals to veterans and elderly neighbors whenever he quietly covered the bill. Sometimes he asked me to organize envelopes filled with receipts from anonymous donations to children's literacy programs and neighborhood food banks. I assumed he was simply a generous retiree trying to make the world a little softer before leaving it behind. Then one rainy Tuesday morning, booth 7 remained empty. The following day, it was still empty. By Friday, the manager quietly handed me a newspaper. Alistair Mercer, founder of Mercer Global, passes away at 83. I stared at the photograph for what felt like forever. The smiling man on the front page was the same gentle customer who always reminded me that patience revealed truths pride could never see. I attended the funeral from the back row without expecting anyone to notice. They didn't. Men in tailored suits discussed stock prices between handshakes. Cameras flashed. Luxury cars lined the street for nearly a quarter mile. I slipped away before anyone could ask why a diner waitress had come. 2 days later, my phone rang. Naomi Brooks. The voice was polished, controlled, and completely unfamiliar. "This is Richard Mercer." Even without an introduction, everyone in America knew that name. Billionaire CEO. Financial magazines called him the future of Mercer Global. Employees called him brilliant. Competitors called him relentless. "My father requested your presence at the reading of his will," he said flatly. I hesitated. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't," Richard replied. "The car will arrive at noon tomorrow. And understand something before you get any ideas. You're only invited because leaving you out would make this family look heartless. Don't mistake courtesy for importance." The line went silent before I could answer, but somehow his final sentence echoed louder than the dial tone. I looked toward the small wooden box where every handwritten birthday card Mr. Alistair had ever given me rested beside my bookshelf, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I suddenly felt that tomorrow would change far more than a single afternoon. The Blacktown car arrived at exactly 12 o'clock, polished so perfectly that the clouds drifting above Chicago shimmered across its doors like moving glass. Naomi stood outside her apartment wearing the only black dress she owned, one she had purchased years earlier for a church fundraiser. It was simple, neatly pressed, and completely out of place beside the luxury vehicle waiting at the curb. The driver opened the rear door without speaking. Inside, Richard Mercer barely glanced away from the financial reports glowing on his tablet. His tailored navy suit looked effortless. His silver watch caught every beam of afternoon sunlight, and his expression suggested the entire day was nothing more than another appointment squeezed between billion-dollar decisions. Naomi quietly fastened her seatbelt. The silence stretched across several city blocks before Richard finally spoke. "You should understand how this works," he said without lifting his eyes. "My father enjoyed helping people. Sometimes he confused kindness with obligation." Naomi turned toward the passing skyline instead of answering. Richard continued in the same calm voice executives often used before delivering bad news. "Whatever sentimental gesture he arranged today, do not mistake it for membership in this family. Mercer Global was built through discipline, not emotions." His words carried no anger. Somehow that made them sting even more. The car left downtown behind and entered one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Illinois. Stone gates slowly opened to reveal the Mercer estate, a mansion surrounded by ancient oak trees, sculpted gardens, and fountains that sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Luxury vehicles already lined the circular driveway. Men and women dressed in expensive designer clothing gathered beneath towering columns, speaking softly about investments, properties, and board appointments as though grief had become another networking opportunity. Naomi stepped from the car feeling hundreds of invisible eyes measuring every detail of her appearance. She recognized the familiar look immediately. It was the same expression some customers gave her before assuming she belonged anywhere except where she happened to be standing. A woman wearing diamonds larger than marbles glanced toward Naomi before quietly asking another guest, "Is she catering staff?" Neither of them waited for an answer. Richard simply walked ahead without slowing down. "Stay close," he said. "Please do not create unnecessary conversations." Inside the estate, crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors. Oil paintings stretched from floor to ceiling, each one honoring another generation of the Mercer family. Naomi noticed something unexpected among all the wealth. Near the grand staircase stood a framed photograph of Alistair Mercer wearing jeans, smiling beside volunteers serving meals at a neighborhood shelter. She remembered that day. She had been there filling soup bowls while Mr. Alistair insisted everyone eat together before anyone cleaned up. No cameras, no speeches, just people helping people. Her chest tightened. A gray-haired attorney approached carrying several leather folders. "Miss Brooks," he asked politely, "thank you for coming. Mr. Alistair specifically instructed that you be present before we begin." Before Naomi could answer, Richard interrupted. "She understands she is here as an observer." The attorney looked at him for a brief moment before replying with measured professionalism. "Actually, Mr. Mercer, your father was very specific regarding Miss Brooks." Richard's confident expression shifted almost imperceptibly before he forced a courteous smile. "We will discuss that inside." The family gathered around an enormous mahogany conference table overlooking the estate gardens. Every chair slowly filled as conversations faded into restless silence. Naomi quietly chose the seat nearest the window, hoping to disappear into the background one final time. Across the room, several relatives organized handwritten notes listing vacation homes, company shares, investment accounts, rare artwork, and vintage automobiles they expected to inherit. Nobody seemed interested in remembering the man whose photograph still smiled from the hallway outside. They were already dividing everything he had left behind. Only Naomi noticed the empty chair at the end of the table, the one where Alistair Mercer would never sit again, patiently reminding everyone that the greatest fortunes were never measured by the numbers inside a bank account. The attorney adjusted his glasses, opened the first leather folder, and allowed the silence to settle over the room before speaking. Even the quiet hum of the air conditioning seemed louder than the breathing around the table. "Thank you all for being here," he began. Mr. Alistair Mercer prepared these instructions personally during the final years of his life, and he requested that every provision be read exactly as written without interruption. Richard leaned back with practiced confidence, folding his hands as though every outcome had already been calculated. Around him, relatives exchanged polite smiles filled with expectation rather than grief. One by one, the attorney began reading the will. A vacation home in Aspen was left to Richard's younger sister. A lake house in Wisconsin went to an uncle who had spent decades managing family investments. Rare paintings were distributed among cousins. Vintage automobiles, company shares, charitable foundations, investment portfolios, and trust accounts each found their assigned beneficiaries. Every new announcement was met with satisfied nods, whispered congratulations, or quiet calculations about future value. Naomi remained completely still. None of it surprised her because none of it belonged to her world. She watched sunlight drift across the polished table and remembered Mr. Allister sitting in booth 7 explaining that wealth was useful only when it traveled farther than the person who earned it. At the time she thought he was simply sharing another life lesson. Now those words echoed differently. As the reading continued, Richard occasionally glanced toward Naomi with the faint confidence of a man whose assumptions had never been challenged. She had received nothing, exactly as he expected. When the attorney announced the final listed asset, several family members began gathering their papers, believing the meeting had ended. Chairs shifted across the hardwood floor. Conversations quietly returned. Someone laughed while discussing renovations to the Aspen property. Another relative was already checking stock prices on a phone. Then the attorney calmly closed the folder without standing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his measured voice cutting cleanly through every conversation. "There is one final instruction from Mr. Allister Mercer. He required that this portion remain sealed until every other asset had been legally distributed." The room immediately fell silent again. The attorney reached into a black leather briefcase and slowly removed a single ivory envelope sealed with dark blue wax bearing the original Mercer family crest. Even Richard straightened in his chair. Every pair of eyes followed the envelope as though it contained the last missing piece of an enormous puzzle. The attorney carefully broke the wax seal and unfolded a handwritten letter. His expression softened before he began reading. "To my dear Naomi Brooks." The words seemed to freeze the air itself. Naomi instinctively looked behind her, almost expecting another Naomi to be standing somewhere else in the room. There was not. Every face slowly turned toward the black waitress sitting quietly by the window. Richard frowned for the first time that afternoon. The attorney continued. "My dear Naomi, thank you for keeping promises you never realized you were making. Every act of kindness offered without expectation becomes part of a legacy no fortune can purchase. One day you will understand why I trusted your heart long before I trusted anyone's ambition. Until that day arrives, remember what I always told you. Patience reveals truths that pride can never see." The letter ended there. Confused whispers immediately spread across the table. One cousin let out a disappointed chuckle. "That is it," another relative muttered. "I thought there would be another fortune hidden somewhere." Richard crossed his arms, unable to hide the faint smirk returning to his face. "My father always enjoyed sentimental gestures," he said quietly enough to sound polite, but loudly enough for Naomi to hear. "Kind words cost far less than real assets." A few relatives smiled in agreement. Naomi carefully lowered her eyes toward the folded letter resting in the attorney's hands. Somehow she knew Mr. Allister had never wasted a single sentence in his life. If he had written those words, they meant something. She simply did not know what yet. The attorney lowered the letter with the same careful respect he had shown from the beginning, but he was not finished. Instead of returning the envelope to his briefcase, he reached inside once more and withdrew two small objects wrapped in dark blue velvet. Every conversation disappeared again. The room leaned forward as though another fortune had suddenly appeared from nowhere. The first item was an old brass key, polished smooth by decades of careful hands. It was surprisingly heavy, its worn edges reflecting the afternoon sunlight pouring through the tall windows. The second item looked almost disappointingly ordinary, a plain white card with nothing except a long sequence of numbers printed neatly across the center. No logo, no explanation, no signature. The attorney carried both items across the room and placed them gently into Naomi's hands. "These were to be delivered only to Miss Naomi Brooks," he said. Naomi stared at the brass key resting against her palm. It felt strangely familiar despite knowing she had never seen it before. She turned over the white card several times, hoping another message might be hidden on the back. There was nothing, just rows of carefully printed numbers that meant absolutely nothing to her. The silence lasted only a heartbeat before someone laughed softly near the opposite end of the table. "That is the grand surprise?" one cousin asked with a grin. Another relative shrugged. "I thought Mr. Mercer had hidden another fortune somewhere." A woman wearing an expensive emerald necklace smiled sympathetically toward Naomi. "Well, at least he wanted you to have something to remember him by." The words sounded kind, but they carried the unmistakable weight of pity. Richard slowly rose from his chair and slipped the final pages of the will into a leather folder. There was satisfaction in the calm confidence of his movements. He looked toward Naomi with the same expression he had worn inside the limousine. "I tried to prepare you," he said. "My father cared deeply about appearances. Giving you a keepsake was his way of saying thank you." His smile remained perfectly controlled. Sentiment has its place. Business is something else entirely. Several relatives quietly nodded before returning to discussions about their newly inherited properties and investment accounts. Plans for renovations, vacations, board meetings, and financial transfers quickly filled the room again. Within minutes, the emotional weight of the funeral had disappeared beneath conversations about market performance and tax strategies. Naomi barely heard any of it. She carefully folded Mr. Allister's letter exactly along its original creases before placing it inside her purse beside the brass key and the mysterious numbered card. During the 3 years she had known him, he had never spoken carelessly. Every story carried a lesson. Every handwritten birthday card contained a thoughtful message. Every quiet conversation over oatmeal and coffee eventually revealed wisdom she needed weeks or even months later. Why would the final gift from a man so deliberate make no sense at all? She gently closed her fingers around the old key once more. It was not disappointment growing inside her. It was curiosity. Something deep within her refused to believe this was the end of Mr. Allister's story. As guests stood, shook hands, and congratulated one another on their inheritances, Naomi quietly slipped out of the conference room unnoticed. Before leaving the estate, she paused beside the framed photograph near the staircase. Mr. Allister's warm smile looked exactly as she remembered it from the neighborhood shelter. Beneath the photograph rested a simple engraved plaque displaying one sentence she had somehow never seen before. "The greatest inheritance is never given to the person who wants the most. It is entrusted to the one who asks for the least." Naomi read the words twice before quietly walking toward the front doors with nothing that looked valuable to anyone else, yet carrying the only inheritance that still felt like an unanswered question. The drive back to her apartment felt strangely quiet, not because the city had changed, but because Naomi could not stop replaying every word Alistair Mercer had written. The brass key rested inside her purse beside the white card, gently tapping against the leather every time the bus rolled over another crack in the pavement. Most people would have accepted the explanation offered inside the mansion. A sentimental farewell, a symbolic gift, a kind gesture toward a waitress who had once been nice to an old man. But Mr. Allister had never believed in empty gestures. He believed every object should solve a problem, every word should outlive the moment it was spoken, and every act of kindness should continue working long after the hands that created it were gone. That evening, Naomi placed the key, the card, and the handwritten letter on her tiny kitchen table beside a cup of chamomile tea. Outside her apartment window, traffic drifted through the streets below while rain clouds slowly gathered over the skyline. She read the letter again, then again. The words never changed, yet somehow they felt different each time. "Thank you for keeping promises you never realized you were making. One day you will understand. Trust your heart. Patience reveals truths that pride can never see." She whispered the final sentence aloud before suddenly freezing. Her eyes drifted toward an old wooden keepsake box resting on the highest shelf of her bedroom closet. Every birthday since she first met Mr. Allister, he had insisted on writing her a handwritten card instead of buying one from a store. Each card contained encouraging words, a small drawing, and, now that she thought about it, unusual strings of numbers worked naturally into the sentences. At the time she had assumed they were little puzzles designed to make her smile. She had never thrown a single one away. Within moments, she pulled the dusty box onto her dining table and carefully opened it. 7 birthday cards lay inside, each protected between sheets of tissue paper. She smiled softly as memories returned. One card thanked her for believing that strangers deserved second chances. Another reminded her that generosity became stronger when nobody was watching. But this time she was not reading the messages alone. She was studying the numbers hidden inside them. Some appeared beside dates. Others followed random words. One card even ended with a sequence that looked almost identical in length to the numbers printed on the white card now resting beside her teacup. Naomi spread every birthday card across the table, arranging them from oldest to newest. The apartment gradually grew darker as evening settled outside, but she barely noticed. Hours slipped past while she copied every number onto a legal pad borrowed from the diner. She circled repeating patterns, underlined matching sequences, and compared each line with the mysterious card from the attorney. Then something unexpected caught her attention. The final 8 digits printed on the white card appeared inside 3 separate birthday messages written years apart, not in the same order, but close enough to make coincidence impossible. Her heartbeat quickened. She reached for another card and discovered another match. Then another. Mr. Allister had not been writing random numbers at all. He had been leaving pieces of something behind, scattering them patiently across birthdays, as though preparing a puzzle only one person would eventually know to solve. Naomi leaned back in her chair, staring at the growing pages of notes covering her table. For the first time since leaving the Mercer estate, confusion slowly gave way to certainty. She still did not know what the brass key unlocked or where the mysterious number belonged, but one truth had become impossible to ignore. Mr. Allister had expected her to find this pattern, and if he had spent years building it piece by piece, then whatever waited at the end of it had never been meant for the people who spent that afternoon counting houses, stock certificates, and bank accounts. It had been waiting patiently for someone willing to look beyond what appeared valuable at first glance. Naomi barely slept that night. Every few hours she returned to the kitchen table, rearranging the birthday cards, tracing the handwritten numbers with the tip of her pencil as though another look might reveal what she had missed before. Shortly after sunrise, she brewed a fresh pot of coffee and spread everything across the table one final time. Instead of reading the numbers from left to right, she began following the order in which Mr. Allister had written each birthday message over the years. Almost immediately another pattern appeared. Certain numbers were repeated only after specific phrases like "trust your heart," "keep your promises," and "kindness always leaves footprints." They were not random at all. They were markers. Directions hidden inside ordinary words. Naomi copied the sequence onto a clean sheet of paper and compared it with the white card from the attorney. Every missing group of numbers fit together perfectly, forming one complete code. Her pulse quickened. There was only one place she could imagine such a code belonged. A safe deposit box. Mr. Allister had once mentioned, almost casually, that some treasures were safest inside buildings where nobody expected to find memories. At the time she assumed he was talking about libraries. Now she wondered if he had been speaking literally. She turned the brass key over in her hand again. Tiny engraved letters near the base had gone unnoticed until sunlight struck the metal at just the right angle. MBT. Beneath the initials was a 4-digit number. Naomi searched online and found exactly one institution using those initials, Mercer Bank and Trust, the oldest private bank in downtown Chicago. Her heart skipped. The 4-digit number matched the branch identification listed on the bank's website. Without wasting another minute, she carefully placed the key, the completed number sequence, and Mr. Allister's letter into her purse before calling the diner. She apologized for missing her morning shift, something she had almost never done. Her manager heard the unusual tension in her voice and simply replied, "Take care of whatever this is. We will manage." 40 minutes later, Naomi stood outside a limestone building that looked more like a museum than a bank. Bronze doors reflected the morning sun while American flags moved gently above the entrance. Business executives entered carrying leather briefcases. Elderly couples quietly greeted the doorman by name. Naomi suddenly became aware of her modest navy blouse and inexpensive shoes. For a brief second, she wondered if she belonged there at all. Then she remembered another sentence Mr. Allister often repeated while stirring his coffee. Doors never decide who is worthy. People do. She walked inside. The marble lobby echoed softly beneath polished ceilings nearly 3 stories high. A receptionist greeted her with a professional smile. "Good morning. How may we assist you?" Naomi placed the brass key on the counter together with the white card. "I believe these belong to Mr. Allister Mercer," she said quietly. The receptionist's expression changed almost instantly. She picked up the key with surprising care before asking Naomi to wait just a moment. Less than 2 minutes later, an older gentleman wearing a dark gray suit approached from a secure hallway. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his nameplate identified him as Benjamin Carlisle, Senior Trust Director. He looked first at the key, then at Naomi, and finally at the handwritten letter she carefully removed from her purse. His calm expression softened into something remarkably close to recognition. "Miss Brooks," he said gently, "we have been expecting you. Mr. Mercer instructed us that no one else, under any circumstances, was ever to receive what this key protects. We were beginning to wonder when you would discover the path he left behind." Benjamin Carlyle held the brass key with both hands as though it represented something far more valuable than metal. "Mr. Mercer planned this many years ago," he said quietly. "He insisted that no employee, family member, board director, or attorney could ever access what this key protects unless you personally appeared with both the key and the completed numerical sequence." Naomi blinked in disbelief. "He knew I would solve it?" Benjamin smiled gently. "He never doubted you for a second." He escorted her through a series of secured hallways where polished stone floors reflected soft golden lighting. Every door required another layer of authorization until they finally reached a private vault unlike anything Naomi had ever imagined. Hundreds of steel deposit boxes covered the walls from floor to ceiling. Benjamin stopped before one that appeared no different from the others except for its number, which matched the final digits hidden across every birthday card Mr. Allister had ever given her. "Whenever you are ready," he said. Naomi's fingers trembled slightly as she inserted the old brass key. The lock turned smoothly, almost as though it had been waiting. Benjamin entered the completed numerical code into a secure keypad beside the box before quietly stepping backward to give her privacy. The drawer slowly slid forward. Naomi expected jewelry, cash, or legal documents connected to another hidden fortune. Instead, she found a thick leather binder, several sealed envelopes, a flash drive, and one final handwritten letter resting neatly on top. Her name appeared across the front in the same careful handwriting she had known for years. She unfolded it slowly. "My dear Naomi, if you are reading this, then you have already proven exactly why you are here. Wealth attracts clever people. Power attracts ambitious people. But trust can only be given to someone whose character never changes when nobody is watching. For 3 years I observed you without revealing who I truly was. You never treated me like a billionaire. You treated me like a lonely old man who deserved respect. That is why this responsibility belongs to you." Naomi felt tears gathering, but continued reading. "Inside this binder you will find every charitable trust one created outside my public estate. None of these assets were included in my will because they were never intended to become family wealth. They exist to serve children, veterans, teachers, neighborhood food programs, and families who simply need someone to believe in them. The combined value is substantial, but the money is not the inheritance. The responsibility is." Naomi carefully opened the leather binder. Every page contained organized records, financial statements, photographs, and handwritten notes documenting scholarships, housing grants, literacy foundations, community kitchens, and medical assistance funds spread across dozens of cities. The total value exceeded $140 million, but every dollar was already assigned to changing lives rather than enriching individuals. Benjamin quietly broke the silence. "Mr. Mercer instructed us that only one person could become the sole trustee with full decision-making authority." Naomi slowly looked up. "Who?" Benjamin met her eyes without hesitation. "You." For several long seconds, she could not speak. "There has to be some mistake," she whispered. Benjamin gently shook his head. "There is none. Every legal document has already been executed. Every independent auditor has confirmed the structure. Every government filing is complete. The moment you opened that box, the responsibility transferred exactly as Mr. Mercer intended." Naomi looked down again at the final page inside the binder. There, beneath Alistair Mercer's signature, was one final handwritten sentence that instantly brought back every quiet breakfast they had shared together. "The world already has enough people who know how to make money. It will always need more people who know how to protect hope." Benjamin gave Naomi as much time as she needed, quietly stepping to the far side of the vault while she continued turning the pages inside the leather binder. Every section revealed another community project that had been operating for years without carrying the Mercer name. Scholarships for first-generation college students. Emergency housing grants for single parents. Mobile libraries serving rural towns. Veteran rehabilitation programs. Food banks that quietly received funding every month without ever knowing who stood behind the donations. Beside nearly every project, Alistair had written small personal notes in the margins. Visit every location before changing anything. Listen before leading. Never confuse efficiency with compassion. Naomi recognized the handwriting instantly. It was the same gentle script that had once wished her happy birthday over a slice of blueberry pie at the diner. Benjamin finally returned carrying another folder. "There is one more document you should read," he said. Inside was a legal memorandum signed by multiple trustees, accountants, and federal compliance officers. Everything had already been reviewed years in advance. The charitable network was legally separate from Mercer Global. Neither Richard Mercer nor any member of the Mercer family owned it, controlled it, or could dissolve it. The only person with authority to appoint future trustees, approve funding, or change long-term strategy was Naomi Brooks. She looked up slowly. "Did Mr. Mercer ever explain why he trusted someone like me with all of this?" Benjamin smiled with quiet certainty. "He explained it many times." He reached into another file and removed a transcript from a recorded interview conducted shortly before Alistair's passing. "He wanted us to understand his decision in case anyone challenged it." Benjamin read aloud. "Every executive I interviewed impressed me with intelligence. Every consultant impressed me with strategy. Every attorney impressed me with preparation. Naomi Brooks impressed me with consistency. Character is what a person repeats when nobody important is watching. She believed I was an ordinary customer with nothing to offer her except another breakfast order, and she never changed the way she treated me. That is the rarest qualification I have ever witnessed." Naomi lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she could not easily describe. She had never tried to impress him. She had never imagined she was being observed. She had simply done what felt right every Thursday morning. Benjamin carefully closed the transcript. Mr. Mercer believed that kindness without expectation is the strongest form of leadership. Before Naomi could respond, a discreet knock echoed through the vault entrance. Another bank executive stepped inside, holding a tablet with an apologetic expression. "Sir, I am sorry to interrupt, but several news outlets are reporting unusual activity surrounding the Mercer estate. Reporters learned there was an unidentified beneficiary present during the reading of the will. They are asking questions." Benjamin nodded calmly before turning back toward Naomi. "Word travels quickly whenever wealthy families are involved." Naomi looked uneasy. "I never wanted attention." "Neither did Mr. Mercer," Benjamin replied. "That is precisely why he prepared for this." He opened the final envelope inside the vault. It contained a formal media statement already signed by Alistair months before his passing. The document explained that the charitable trusts had always existed independently and that their future trustee had been selected through years of personal observation rather than family inheritance. It revealed no financial totals and protected Naomi's privacy while making one point unmistakably clear. The appointment was deliberate, permanent, and legally unquestionable. Benjamin handed her the statement before speaking one final sentence. "By tomorrow morning, Richard Mercer and every member of his family will learn that the smallest inheritance they ignored was never the real inheritance at all." By sunrise, the story had already escaped the quiet walls of Mercer Bank and Trust. Business reporters questioned why an unknown black waitress had been named trustee of one of the largest private charitable networks in the Midwest. Financial analysts searched public records, only to discover that every document had been filed years earlier with extraordinary precision. Attorneys confirmed the structure could not be challenged. Board members quietly admitted they had never known the trusts even existed. Throughout the day, headlines changed from speculation to certainty. The mysterious beneficiary was not inheriting a fortune for herself. She had inherited the responsibility of protecting a legacy that had already transformed thousands of lives. Naomi returned to the Blue Lantern Diner that afternoon, wearing the same uniform she had folded the night before. She tied her apron, poured coffee, greeted every customer with the same gentle smile, and never mentioned the events unfolding across every business news channel. Her manager eventually walked over holding a newspaper with her photograph on the front page. "You know you do not have to be here anymore," he said quietly. Naomi smiled. "People still need breakfast." He laughed softly before walking away, shaking his head with admiration. Nothing about her had changed except the knowledge she now carried. Across the city, Richard Mercer experienced a very different morning. His executive assistant entered the boardroom carrying several legal reports together with the official statement released from Mercer Bank and Trust. The room slowly fell silent as attorneys confirmed every signature, every trust agreement, and every appointment had been completed under Alistair Mercer's direct supervision years before his death. Richard read the final page twice before setting it down without speaking. For the first time in his career, there was no strategy meeting capable of changing the outcome. 5 days after dismissing Naomi as someone invited only to avoid appearing heartless, Richard stood outside her small apartment, carrying no security detail, no photographers, and no confidence. Only humility. When Naomi opened the door, she found the Billionaire CEO standing quietly in the hallway holding the handwritten letter she had accidentally left behind at the Mercer estate. He extended it toward her with both hands. "This belongs to you," he said. She accepted it politely. Several long seconds passed before he finally spoke again. "I was wrong about you." Naomi remained silent. Richard lowered his eyes. "The truth is, I was wrong about my father too. I thought he spent his final years becoming sentimental. I never realized he was measuring something I stopped noticing a long time ago." His voice carried none of the certainty it once had. "I came to apologize." Naomi looked at him with the same calm expression she had worn inside the limousine days earlier. "Thank you," she answered gently. Richard waited, hoping for something more. An invitation. A conversation. Forgiveness. Instead, Naomi simply smiled with quiet grace. "Mr. Mercer always told me that kindness should never depend on what someone can give you afterward. I believe he was right." Richard nodded slowly. He understood. Some opportunities disappear forever the moment pride speaks louder than character. He thanked her one final time before quietly walking back toward the elevator. Naomi watched until the doors closed, then returned inside her apartment. She placed Alistair's final letter beside the brass key that had changed everything. Months later, the charitable network expanded into new neighborhoods, new schools, and new community programs without carrying Naomi's name across any building. She preferred it that way. Every decision honored the promise she had never realized she was making years earlier over simple breakfasts and quiet conversations. People often believed the greatest inheritance was measured in dollars, companies, or estates. Alistair Mercer understood something far more valuable. Money can build an empire. Character decides who deserves to protect it. And in the end, the billionaire did not leave his greatest legacy to the person with the most power. He entrusted it to the black waitress who had quietly proven, long before anyone was watching, that dignity, compassion, and integrity never require an audience.